It began with whispers, then came emails, then, devastatingly, the secret recordings. What unraveled wasn't just a political scandal. It was the implosion of a carefully constructed image, exposing a web of bribery, backdoor dealings, and the flagrant misuse of taxpayer money. At the center of the storm, Mayor Tiffany Henyard. For years, Henyard had ruled Dalton, Illinois with an iron grip, her face emblazoned on billboards and her name synonymous with power. She spoke with polish, carried herself like a rising star, and wrapped herself in a narrative of progress, empowerment, and political defiance. But behind the photo ops and slogans, a much darker truth had taken root. As evidence began to surface, so did the cracks in her empire. Emails pointed to murky financial arrangements. Recordings caught backroom conversations that contradicted her public statements. Residents, once loyal and inspired, began to watch in horror as the woman they had trusted to lead them was revealed to be something far different. The courtroom was packed when the bombshell evidence was presented. Tiffany Henyard sat at the defense table, her once stoic expression slowly draining of color as the prosecution clicked through a damning presentation. Slide after slide revealed financial mismanagement, bloated salaries for political allies, and public funds funneled into vague, unaccountable community projects. Her silence was louder than any denial. The people of Dalton, once her most passionate supporters, now sat frozen in disbelief. Then, the silence shattered. With a furious thud, Henyard slammed her fist on the polished courtroom table. Her chair screeched as she leapt to her feet. "This is a setup," she shouted, her voice raw and cracking. But the courtroom didn't flinch. The judge, unfazed, brought the gavel down hard. "Order," he demanded, the sound reverberating across the room. Still, Henyard wasn't done. Pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at the prosecutors, she snarled, "This is political. You don't want a strong woman." The irony was bitter. Here stood a woman who had used her position to intimidate officials, sidestep transparency, and consolidate power. Now portray herself as a victim of oppression. She was no longer untouchable, no longer the architect of the narrative. She was cornered and flailing. In a final act of chaos, she turned on her own legal team. "You were supposed to handle this," she snapped. Her voice cut through the tension like a blade. One attorney dropped his pen, fumbling through a stack of papers, while another kept his eyes fixed on the floor, visibly shaken. The once imposing political machine Henyard had built was crumbling in real time. Then, with theatrical finality, she snatched up her designer handbag, ripped the microphone from her collar, and stormed out of the courtroom. The silence that followed was brief. Before the room erupted, applause broke out, growing into a roar. Court officials banged on desks, shouting for order as the crowd surged with energy. "That's what happens when you steal the people's money," one voice rang out. Reporters scrambled, cell phones raised high. "Did you see her face?" someone cackled. "I told you she was a crook," shouted another. Inside, her closest allies were paralyzed. Phones rang unanswered. Lawyers and aides whispered furiously, trying to coordinate damage control. But it was far too late. The scandal had detonated. Outside the courthouse, chaos reigned. The sharp click of Henyard's designer heels echoed as she stormed down the courthouse steps, flanked by a shrinking security detail. Cameras flashed. Reporters swarmed. "Mayor Henyard, do you have a comment on the leaked recordings? Is it true millions of taxpayer dollars are missing when you resign after the day's hearing?" She said nothing, her jaw clenched, eyes locked ahead. She refused to acknowledge the growing circle of accountability around her. Her security detail attempted to hold the press back, but the swarm was unrelenting. Henyard kept walking, faster now, her pace matching the urgency of a woman on the brink. Then came the moment no one expected. A voice sliced through the crowd. One woman stepped forward, blocking Henyard's path. She wasn't just another protester or angry resident. She was Dalton's former treasurer. Months ago, she had resigned abruptly, citing ethical concerns and tensions inside the mayor's office. Many dismissed her at the time. Not anymore. Her eyes burned with controlled fury. The crowd hushed. "Tiffany," she said flatly. Her voice didn't shake. "I warned you." Cameras swiveled. Reporters stilled. For the first time that day, Henyard looked rattled. Her momentum halted. Her defiant stride broke. She stood face to face with someone who had once been inside the circle, someone who had seen everything, someone who knew exactly what had happened behind the curtain. "This city trusted you," the woman continued. "You didn't just break laws, you broke faith. No gavel, no courtroom bench, just raw justice in the open air." Henyard's security gently tried to guide her away, but the damage was done. She had no words, no defense. she pushed past in silence, her mask cracking as the woman's words followed her down the steps. And overhead, news helicopters circled like vultures. This was no longer just about Dalton. This was national. The super mayor who had branded herself as progressive, bold, and untouchable was now the face of scandal. The same woman who had strutted into meetings with poise and power now fled from questions and confrontation. The media vans buzzed. Social feeds exploded. The once loyal inner circle scrambled behind her, calling donors, texting lawyers, trying to salvage whatever was left of the shattered administration. But the people of Dalton weren't buying spin anymore. They had seen the truth, and the applause from the courtroom still echoed in their ears. The allegations? Bribery, fraud, gross misuse of public funds. Her defense? Thin, desperate. Public sentiment had turned, and fast. Inside the courtroom, prosecutors had detonated their case like a bomb. Emails, recordings, financials, all pointing to one conclusion. Henyard hadn't governed. She had exploited. And now, the reckoning was here. She had once entered rooms with fanfare and flashes. Today, she walked out amid shouts and shame. Her silence screamed louder than her denials ever could. She was no longer the woman she pretended to be, but the symbol of betrayal she had become. Truth always rises. The final collapse of Mayor Tiffany Henyard, the hypocrisy, was suffocating. Here was Tiffany Henyard, long accused of bullying local leaders, inflating salaries for her inner circle, and funneling public money into shady ventures. Now crying foul and painting herself as a victim of political persecution. It was vintage Henyard, deflect, distract, deny. But this time, the room wasn't listening. The illusion had shattered. For the first time in her career, Tiffany Henyard couldn't spin her way out. As prosecutors revealed photo evidence of luxury penthouses and beachfront villas, paid with taxpayer money, the courtroom was gripped by stunned silence, which quickly turned into murmurs of outrage. Images of opulence flashed across the screen. Crystal chandeliers, private elevators, marble bathtubs, designer furniture. This wasn't just fraud, it was betrayal on a deeply personal level. Outside, a crowd surged beyond the courthouse steps. Protesters waved signs reading "Justice for Dalton," and "Where's the money?" made the air was electric. News crews reported live headlines blaring the same damning truth. Asterisk Mayor Tiffany Henyard exposed. Asterisk inside, the former treasurer Dalton took the witness stand. Her voice was steady. Her eyes were unflinching. "I warned them," she testified. "I begged the council to investigate. But every time I got close, I was shut down, bullied, silenced. Today isn't just about numbers. It's about justice." She wasn't alone. One by one, more whistleblowers stepped forward. Former staffers, department heads, even local business owners. Each recounted a disturbing pattern of intimidation, financial manipulation, and abuse of power. What had once been brushed off as gossip had hardened into undeniable truth, a damning tapestry of corruption. Then came the final blow. An audio recording, never before heard by the public, was played in court. Henyard's voice rang out, casual and confident. "It's just a little shifting of funds," she laughed. "No one's going to trace it, not if we do it right." The room erupted. There was no mistaking her voice, no denying her intent. The judge called for order, but the damage was done. One journalist, scribbling notes at the back of the courtroom, whispered, "She's finished." By day's end, the district attorney formally announced criminal charges: fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. A warrant was issued for Henyard's immediate arrest. But she was gone. Rumors swirled. Had she fled the state? Was she hiding in one of her luxury properties? The FBI issued a statement confirming an active manhunt. The scandal had officially transformed into a national criminal case. Dalton stood still, not out of fear, but from the sheer weight of what was unfolding. A community lied to, used, and discarded was now reclaiming its voice. As night fell, a mural appeared on the side of Dalton's old town hall, spray painted in bold red. "Truth always rises." The Henyard era was over, yet the courtroom still buzzed with one urgent question. Asterisk, who really owned those properties? When the answer came, it hit like a hammer. The names weren't distant or anonymous. They were familiar, deeply connected to Henyard's political machine. Among them, her boyfriend. He held suspicious ties to multiple properties under scrutiny. And notably, he was absent from court that day, a silence that spoke volumes. As prosecutors revealed the full extent of the scheme, the narrative shifted again. This wasn't mere political misconduct or bureaucratic sloppiness. This was deliberate. This was criminal. And Henyard? She was still nowhere to be found. Then the moment came. The judge, his voice sharp and deliberate, delivered a bombshell. This court hereby authorizes a formal criminal investigation into Mayor Tiffany Henyard's personal and public finances. The room froze. That single declaration shifted everything. What had been speculation was now a full-scale criminal probe, one with potential to escalate into federal charges. For Dalton's residents, long haunted by rumors and buried truths, it was more than a legal move. It was vindication. Outside, the crowd exploded into cheers as the news broke. Lock her up? We finally got her. The chants grew louder. The air, thick with years of frustration, now surged with hope. But blocks away, Henyard remained in denial. She still believed she could twist the story, play the victim, manipulate the media. What she couldn't see, what she refused to accept, was that the walls were already closing in. Then the call came, a voice she knew, tight with panic. Cut through the line. Madam Mayor, it's bad. Real bad. She froze. A pause. Then the blow. The investigation. It's federal. They're coming after you. Her breath caught. Her chest tightened. Federal charges weren't just headlines. They were prison. This wasn't a PR crisis. This wasn't a scandal she could outrun. This was the law. And it was coming to fall of Tiffany Henyard. From untouchable to unraveled asterisk. She tried to catch her breath, but the pressure kept building. For the first time in her life, Tiffany Henyard had no script to follow, no spin to deliver. The control she once gripped so tightly had evaporated. Calls flooded in. Messages buzzed without pause. But no amount of PR maneuvering could undo what had begun. The foundation she had built on intimidation, deception, and greed was crumbling beneath her, and there was no one left to hold it up. Back in the courtroom, the judge's ruling was clear and final. A full-scale investigation into Mayor Henyard's financial empire had been greenlit. The truth, long buried under bureaucratic obstruction and political gamesmanship, was no longer speculative. It was real. It was happening. And nothing Henyard could say or spin could stop it. Outside, the chants were deafening. They echoed to the marble halls of the courthouse and into the very car where Henyard sat, stone-faced. As the sound seeped in, asterisk, lock her up, lock her up. Asterisk, the same people who had once feared her now demanded her arrest. Her phone kept vibrating, message after message lighting up the screen, but she didn't respond. She couldn't. For the first time, the weight of it all settled in. She wasn't the untouchable mayor anymore. She was the target of a federal investigation. Her power was gone, her lies exposed. The reckoning she had long escaped had finally arrived. Once, Tiffany Henyard had been the queen of Dalton, powerful, feared, a political juggernaut who ruled through manipulation, intimidation, and media spin. She outwitted scandal after scandal, bending systems and silencing critics. But now, alone in her car, she was no longer a symbol of authority. She was a symbol of disgrace. Inside her chest, dread took hold. Outside, the crowds erupted in cheers, not just over fall, but over what it meant. Accountability, long overdue. For the first time in her political career, Henyard wasn't leading anything. She was running from everything. Isolation had finally come for her. The police officers who once stood proudly beside her now awaited orders to detain her. Her once loyal staff had vanished. Even her attorney, the man who had stood between her and disaster for months, couldn't meet her eyes. And her boyfriend, her closest confidant and alleged co-conspirator in many of the scandal's darkest details, had disappeared entirely. She had burned every bridge. And now she was standing alone on the ash heap. Her phone lit up again. She didn't pick it up. She already knew the message. The investigation was expanding. Every backroom deal, every shady real estate transaction, every undeclared account. Under the microscope, no stone would be left unturned. Panic bloomed. She scanned the street, desperate for an exit, a strategy, something. But there was nothing. No shield, no cover story, no allies. The consequences were no longer distant threats or buried whispers. They were here. They were knocking. Back inside the courthouse, the final blow landed. The case is open, the judge announced. This investigation is real, and it will proceed with full authority. That was it. The legal system Henyard had danced around for years had finally caught up to her. And the city of Dalton, long held in a chokehold of fear and suppression, was watching as justice stirred to life. But the drama didn't stop there. Just across town, in a news studio packed with reporters, a former aide from Henyard's own administration came forward. Shaking, her voice barely rising above a whisper, she uttered the words that would send shockwaves across the nation. I worked in that office for years, the woman said. I saw how the money flowed, how public funds were discreetly funneled into private hands, and when I tried to speak out, I was threatened. The reporter leaned in, stunned. Threatened? By whom? The room held its breath. The woman didn't blink. By Tiffany Henyard herself. Gasps echoed. Cameras snapped. The accusation was direct and explosive. And then came the moment that cemented the collapse. From her purse, the whistleblower produced a small black recorder. I have proof, she said. Silence swept across the studio. If verified, the recording would be a game changer, not just politically, but criminally. The very mayor who built a regime of silence through fear and intimidation was now being brought down by the voices she once tried to crush. There was no spin, no escape, not this time. Meanwhile, the courthouse buzzed with renewed energy. Prosecutors moved swiftly. The judge, stone-faced and resolute, approved an expansive probe into Henyard's finances. Federal agencies were mobilizing. What started as a local scandal had now escalated into a full-blown federal investigation. The legal system had been activated, and it wasn't stopping. The people of Dalton gathered in the streets. Their chants, raw and triumphant, filled the air. Lock her up. Justice for Dalton. No more lies. They waved homemade signs that twisted Henyard's once charming campaign slogans into symbols of betrayal. The city that had once lived in fear of her was now celebrating her downfall. And they weren't just cheering the end of her reign. They were cheering the return of their voice. But just when Henyard thought it couldn't get worse, it did. The first arrest warrant was issued, not for her, but for her top financial advisor, the man closest to the money, the man who knew where the bodies, financially speaking, were buried. Reporters raced to confirm the story. Anonymous sources added fuel to the fire. The FBI was officially involved. The case had gone federal. In the car, Henyard turned to her lawyer. Her voice was low, her eyes wild. "Fix this," she whispered. But he didn't speak. He didn't even look at her. His silence said everything. There was nothing left to fix. She was past the point of salvation. Reality hit her like a freight train. The fear she once inspired had curdled into fury. Her political empire had collapsed. And now, her legacy was not one of leadership, but of corruption, disgrace, and betrayal. As the crowd outside roared louder, Henyard sat frozen behind the tinted windows of her car. She could see them, ordinary people with fire in their eyes, chanting for justice. This wasn't just another PR mess. This wasn't a reputational bruise. This was the end of the road. The truth, long buried in sealed files, silenced voices, and suppressed audits, was out, and it was rising. Tiffany Henyard was no longer the mayor of Dalton. She was the face of everything the people were ready to tear down. And as her phone buzzed one final time, she didn't answer, because there was nothing left to say.